We're live. Hello, friends. Welcome to Be Waste Wise Pioneers and Changemakers. We started two initiatives this year. Pioneers and Changemakers is a 30-minute weekly interview series featuring some of the best minds creating sustainable change worldwide. And one of our interviews as part of the Pioneers and Changemakers with Adam Reed is rescheduled for this Friday. So please join in. He works with Suez UK and is one of the most respected professionals in the industry. He'll also talk about the trends and updates from UK. He'll talk about the impact of China ban on recyclables on Europe and his work, motivation, and the role he is playing in bringing about change. Our second initiative is called Be Waste Wise Collective, where we're partnering with large organizations to make their knowledge easily accessible to a global audience. Our first partnership was with the International Solid Waste Association, ISWA. And the first event of that partnership will be tomorrow, an interview with Antonis Mavropoulos, the president of ISWA, who will talk about the China ban on recyclables and what we should be doing, the way forward. And we'll also have a guest joining us during that interview, David Biderman, who's the president of the Solid Waste Association of North America, SWANA. He'll also give us a quick update about what SWANA's doing about the China ban. Now, as part of the Be Waste Wise Collective, we're also partnering with the Asian Development Bank Institute and Waste UK as we speak. And those partnerships and that knowledge that content will also start soon. Now, coming to today's pioneer and changemaker, Renan Poveda. He's here. He's a senior environmentalist specialist and a project manager at World Bank. And he's doing some great work coordinating the national strategy for Mexico and capacity building and financial infrastructure for waste management there. Since this has not been done, I think it's amazing that he's putting all of this together. So let's hear more from him. Renan, welcome to Be Waste Wise.
Good morning, Ranjit. Thank you. How are you?
How are you doing? Seem to be coughing.
Doing well, thanks.
All right, great, wonderful. So, Renan, could you talk to us a little bit about the work you do, and could you also put that in context of what has already happened and what has to happen?
Sure. Basically, being at the World Bank allows us to interact with a series of key stakeholders, particularly government, in trying to solve particular challenges and issues that they face. In the case of solid waste management, when I arrived in Mexico, what I've seen is that there's a lot of agencies working on this particular issue, but not necessarily coordinating among each other. And most of the efforts that are actually being channeled or done at the local level are to try to put together collecting systems, to try to channel resources just for collecting systems and clean up the cities, municipalities, and to build some sanitary landfills, and that's it. Unfortunately, in Mexico, they have not really looked at how to address solid waste management in an integrated manner. They have very low levels of recycling. The recycling levels here are below 10%, whereas OECD is like 33% on average. So basically, what my role has been is look at the current situation, what are the challenges, and try to identify what are the key opportunities where we could actually intervene to support the government and different stakeholders, from civil society, from private sector, in actually improving the overall approach to solid waste management in the country.
And what are you doing about it right now?
Well, what we started doing was, first of all, we carried out a series of studies to try to understand what the situation is. For instance, what are the sources of funding? How are they working out? How are they, how efficient are these? And identifying also who are the champions that would actually like to do some changes along the line. So in that sense, we started preparing the National Integrated Solid Waste Management Project. It was going to be a very large project nationally that would actually provide technical and financial support at the federal, state, and municipal level. And why the three stages? Because each of them have a specific role in how to address this particular thing. In the process, we've managed to do a lot of technical assistance. We as part of the preparation of the project, we started doing a lot of technical assistance on different issues. We started, for instance, identifying key areas that needed to be worked out that have never been done. For instance, not only in Mexico, but in the region and probably worldwide, very few municipalities or governments know exactly what is the amount of money that they actually spend, the overall cost through the whole solid waste management cycle. So we, in another project that I was also leading in Argentina, we developed a tool to be able to identify what are the costs. So, for instance, one of the work that we've been doing in throughout this process of project preparation is carrying out this capacity building through a cost financing matrix to identify what are the real costs. And once they have this information, it basically kind of empowers the mayors in order to take action. And that's just one example. I mean, but basically, to come back to the original question, basically through this national project for solid waste management, the end goal is to try to strengthen the capacity of the Mexican government to be able to address the challenges that are facing on this particular sector.
All right, that's great. So maybe we should discuss about it in a slightly different way, which is, could you talk about the challenges that you're facing right now? I know, in developing countries, there must be, enormous challenges a lot of them. But can you talk about the top challenges that you have, and can you put that in a time frame of how you plan to solve them? For example, how many years are you hoping to solve a certain problem, and then, could you just put that in a time frame perspective for us?
Sure. I mean, I look at it the way we tend to divide them into kind of like the technical and the administrative challenges. And both of them are quite complicated, and some of them, and in identifying these challenges, we try to come up with an action plan or with strategies in how to solve them in the short, medium, and long term. The short is obviously the easiest kind of solutions. But just to give you a few examples on what we call the administrative challenges. First of all, for instance, in Mexico, the mayors or the municipal governments only last 3 years, and usually do not have chance for re-election. I mean, the re-election is something that is now being worked out. So within this context, it's very difficult to try to sell out a project or sell out improvements in solid waste management, because basically carrying out a procurement or a bidding process to get some works out may take a long time. So it's, so we find a challenge that the mayors do not actually feel compelled to actually work on this particular issue. Another key challenge is the lack of technical capacity at the 3 levels of government. So obviously that's something that you have people that are not necessarily prepared. It's not that they don't want to learn, but they don't have the elements or the tools. And part of our challenge, part of the thing that we want to do is to be able to empower them or to have the capacity or provide technical assistance and capacity building so that they would be better prepared to address some of these issues. Another key challenge that we find is the lack of political support. A lot of mayors, in particular, do not see solid waste management as something that they can score political points. And this is something quite interesting, because when we've been working, for instance, with key mayors of big cities in Argentina, through an ongoing process, they learn that solid waste management is something that actually can give them a lot of credibility and can give them a lot of power. So that's also a key challenge, Another issue is the NIMBY factor, not in my backyard kind of thing. Nobody wants anything with solid waste because they consider that it's dirty, that it can bring diseases and so forth. But as we've seen in some examples in Europe or in Asia, actually in the middle of the city, they have, waste to energy installations or systems. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that. So part of the challenge we have is to convince them that not necessarily waste is something that is bad, no? And the other key challenge that we see is the lack of financing, the lack of resources that actually go into this. As I mentioned probably earlier, that one of the things is that what we have seen is that solid waste management is a highly subsidized sector. A lot of resources go into it, but they don't necessarily, the authorities do not necessarily know or understand what these costs are. And why is that? Is because on the one hand, you have, for instance, The secretaries of finance are not talking with the secretaries of infrastructure or the ones that are responsible for environment or for the the public spaces, and all of them have something to do one way or another with with financing the whole cycle of solid waste management. So those are some of the challenges that we've seen on that. On the other hand, we see, for instance, new areas that have not been addressed. For instance, food waste. Food waste is something that is been there for a long time, but nobody has actually carried out in-depth studies to quantify what are the volumes of food waste and what are the environmental, social, and economic costs associated with this particular challenge, which is something which, by the way, we've been doing quite extensively here in Mexico. I don't know if more or less that answers the question,
No, that's very useful. So you are thinking about this entire plan in the short, medium, and long-term strategies, which is wonderful to know, because whenever there is a discussion about waste management systems or waste management technology, the conversation usually turns to technology, and then everything and hell breaks loose, right? Then you can't go further. But when you put the time frame in perspective, then that really helps us take better decisions about that. But before we go further, I wanted to also try to understand your personal motivation. So, you understand how change happens at different time frames, different scales, in different parts of the world. In different sectors. So where do you see yourself in this kind of change, and what's your end goal? What are you doing? Where do you want to be with Mexico?
I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, I think being at the World Bank gives me a privileged position to be able to interact with different array of stakeholders, from the beneficiaries at the local communities, from NGOs, from private sector, from the different levels of government, from the highest levels of government. And I think my role is, in a way, being able to articulate or to bring synergies among all these different actors in finding common solutions. The issue of solid waste management is something that I've been working for over 10 years, and it's something that is a problem from what we've seen not only in Latin America, and I've seen it already in Peru, Brazil, Argentina, Mexico, Chile, and so forth. But there's a need to actually do something about it. It is something that is already affecting the economy. In the case of Mexico, it's already having a repercussion, for instance, on the tourism sector, which is one of the key economic sectors that we have here in the country. The cost associated, for instance, with the food lost and waste is tremendous. It's astronomical. We calculated that is at least around 45% of the GDP. We have, so I mean, looking at all of the dimensions that are associated with the improper management of waste is what has motivated me to actually try to do something about it and try to bring all the pieces together, all the people together. One of the things that we've been doing, for instance, is technical exchanges. We have taken government officials from Mexico to see how Argentina has been dealing with their challenges. We have taken them to Morocco. We have taken them to South Korea. Particularly in South Korea, they're champions in dealing with the solid waste management issues. And basically, this is a way of bringing people together that they can actually strike synergies to basically try to come up with the solutions to these issues, to these challenges.
You mentioned South Korea. I mean, it's such an amazing story, such a story that they have in South Korea. I mean, they started with open dump sites just a few decades ago, and now they're at a point where they're charging for recycling. I mean, where they're reducing consumption of recyclables by charging for, charging waste service. I think they call it the save as you throw or pay as you throw volume-based waste collection fee. So I think it's a great success story from where they went, where they were, to where they got in this short amount of time. I think definitely, like you said, there's a lot that other developing countries can learn from them. But coming back again to your motivation, so what is it? Is it the is it the need for the waste management sector to improve that drives you, or is it the fact that it impacts people and environment, or is it just that do you want to see Mexico at a different point? Like, what is the personal motivation for you? That's what I was trying to get at with the previous question.
Okay, all of them actually. Definitely, what motivates me is to see, first of all, a problem and try to be able to solve it or contribute in solving a specific issue. Second, obviously, the impacts. The impacts associated to solid waste management are tremendous, and this is something that really strikes me. From basically, going to the beach and be able to, and see more plastic than anything. Sometimes, it's something that really, gets to me. And definitely, I have not been living in Mexico for most of my life, but being back in Mexico now, definitely I want to be able to contribute to improving the conditions and improving the livelihoods of the citizens in the way I can. Even if I'm putting a little my small grain of sand into this whole equation, basically that's kind of what drives me to try to change the world and change particularly the country I'm living in right now.
Well, it's not just grains of sand that you're doing, but all right. So challenges motivate you. Your problem solver. Wonderful, great. We have a question from James Grayson. James Grayson is one of our pioneers, a pioneer in Changemaker. He's been a very frequent contributor on BWasteWise. And hey, James, thanks for joining us. And I changed the background because you asked me to. So thank you very much for the recommendation. And so James asks, well, before asking James' question, I want to ask this, right? So in Europe and US, they're discussing about circular economy, moving to a completely different paradigm of resources management. And I see many of the developing countries lagging behind, And I know we discussed this earlier, and you are definitely thinking about the most sustainable methods and also, the current situation that the developing countries are in. So I would like to understand how you think about this. I mean, these countries are doing all these amazing stuff, but in the same vein, James' question is, waste strategies today focus on the post-waste stages, collection, treatment, disposal, etc. This locks countries into linear waste-making economies. When will you switch to strategies and funding that supports circular economies by focusing on pre-cycling? Pre-cycling is a concept that James Grayson has used quite a bit, and it's something that he's developed. And he also asks, you describe resistance to incinerators as NIMBY, which suggests that World Bank thinking on waste is struggling to move from obsolete methods of waste disposal. What do you think? What do you think stops World Bank from advancing their thinking? But maybe if I could respond, maybe it's not thinking, but maybe it's okay. Actually, why don't you respond to that?
Okay, so let me try to understand the questions. First is on circular economy, correct? What is the likelihood of pushing this, for instance, in Latin America or in Mexico? And second is related to incineration. Correct?
So it's about circular economy, and then why aren't developing countries thinking about circular economy? I think that's the crux of the question.
All right, okay. First of all, they are. There have been already several events, workshops, forums that we've seen that are already taking place regarding circular economy. There's some publications already going on. I mean, they're looking at international examples of what has already worked and what has not. The way I see it, particularly for Mexico, is a terrific area of opportunity. It's something that has not yet been done. It's something that like I mentioned earlier, Mexico is recycling less than 10% of its waste. That is a tremendous area of opportunity. One of the things that probably we have to start is with implementing in some municipalities or for large generators some recycling schemes. And this will actually lead me later to the incineration question. But that's actually one of the key things. Mexico, for instance, given the poor water quality that it has, is one of the countries that consumes more bottled water in the world. And you can imagine also the ways that it generates related to that. So definitely, what can we do actually with all of that plastic? I mean, that it's an area of opportunities. I mean, definitely it's a problem, but also we see it as an area of opportunity. So that is something definitely that, I mean, and with that, I can give you other examples. So the answer is yes. People are thinking about it. The answer is it's a lot to be done actually, and this is something that we will actually like to include as part of this solid waste management project.
Right. So let me ask the question about the thinking part. Right. I mean, you're at the World Bank. You have access to some of the best minds out there, and you're aware of what's happening in Europe. So can you talk about the thinking part? Like, how do you understand what's happening in Europe and then trying to implement that in Mexico? Or do you think it's very different, or it's actually quite similar in that everyone's progressing towards a certain goal?
No, I think that, I mean, even though I would like to say it's similar, it's not. I mean, the stages, I don't know how to call it, the stages of being being able to have the capacity to do things is probably easier, obviously, in Europe than it is here in Mexico. The recycling, for instance, in Mexico City, even though they have tried several times to, for people to separate in-house, and that there would be, the collecting trucks picking up trash on different days, things that it hasn't happened. The collecting trucks in Mexico City are like mobile recycling units. You have the guys basically, scrambling and separating all these things. Having a change like that, particularly because of the social implications, are quite complicated. You have a lot of people, for instance, living in the dump sites or in the final disposal sites, which depend on this livelihood. And these are, very powerful mafias. And until you implement some solid social inclusion schemes where all benefit, it's going to be very difficult to actually change that and start implementing something like, the startup kind of like of the recycling strategy or recycling plan. But that is not to say that it cannot be done. Of course, it can be done. And basically, what we're trying to look is what would be the best, the elements or the best, the kind of like the path that needs to be taken in order to carry out this change.
Right. And here, I think it'll also be interesting to, I've been working on a lot of World Bank projects, and I have seen, I would say, a kind of an innovation in how World Bank operates about these projects. For example, earlier, they used to generally come up with financing for a certain project, and, and that would be the first step, we have financing now, why don't you build a project around it and then we'll finance it? That was the first step. But now they're trying to do a lot of groundwork in any country or in any city that they want to work in, and build capacity before they could go to the point, build capacity, change policy, and create collaborations before they go to the point of financing. So in this process, I think you're doing a similar work in Mexico right now. I've seen something similar happening in Ethiopia, where I'm working right now. So could you talk about that a little bit? Your perspective, your experience?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, obviously, when we start tackling these particular issues, first we have to see that the government is convinced to work with us and that they want to do something, they want to change. Usually we get a request from government to say, listen, we would like to get the support from the World Bank in doing this. And in putting all of this together, obviously we look at ways of first building the capacity, because that's kind of like a common denominator. Sometimes there's just lack of technical and administrative capacity. But one of the lessons that we've had is that in addressing these particular projects, you have to make it tailor-made. You cannot replicate the same thing that worked, for instance, in Brazil to Mexico, or what worked in Morocco, because the conditions are completely different. And even within a country, municipality X is going to be completely different from municipality Y. So you really have to tailor and look at what are the specific conditions and what actually needs to be done. So in that sense, kind of one of the lessons is in putting these kind of projects, you have to be very flexible on how do you accommodate this kind of the financing and the technical aspects. Oh, and by the way, you want me to cover the issue regarding incineration?
Sure, yeah. We discussed about this too, and about the differences in the way you finance and the scale. So please go ahead.
Okay, no, Basically, on incineration, we internally in the bank are constantly having a debate on whether we should support it or not support it. Obviously, this is something that has technically proven to be successful in other countries. We've seen it in particular in Asia, in Korea, for instance, in Germany. In many places, it actually works, and it is part of the overall strategy. The questions or the concerns we have for certain developing countries is that, first of all, the investment is quite costly. It's very, very, very high. Sometimes it is hard to see if there would be or not a rate of return for the initial investment. Secondly, you need to have a very thorough and functioning recycling system so that whatever you're actually going to be inputting into the incinerator is actually something that will have a high caloric value. Third, you really need to have very highly qualified and prepared technical staff, which you don't always have. So the question is, where are these people going to get trained, and are they going to get paid enough to actually manage this kind of thing? And then, but perhaps what really is an element of concern is that if we at the bank would like to actually promote waste reduction as a whole, as a strategy, sometimes having an incinerator is kind of like a perverse incentive, because you actually need waste to feed into the incinerator scheme. So those are some of the debates that we're actually looking into. In Latin America, there's only 2 countries in the Caribbean, which are European colonies, who have incinerators. Other than that, Mexico has been pushing for one. They do not have it yet. They want one for Mexico City, but and also they're planning perhaps one for the future in Monterrey. But we're a little bit concerned on how they're going to be able to structure it. It's not that we don't support it, but we have kind of like in terms of a cost-efficient way to have investment for solid waste management. That's more or less what we also want to look at. So that's kind of like our thinking along these lines.
Right. Now, there are answers to some of those questions, and some of the other questions, need to be decided based on the local conditions. But there are only 3 minutes, so we'll not be able to discuss all of them. So, I know you're right. I mean, once you talk about getting to that, it kind of goes in a completely different direction. So, do you have any final thoughts, Renan, about what's happening in Mexico, and the kind of maybe if there's any help that you need from someone who's watching, they could help you. Do you have any final thoughts?
No, first of all, Ranjit, really to thank you for this opportunity and to be able to share some of our thoughts on the work that we're doing. I mean, I think this is a fascinating agenda. There's a lot to be done. Particularly, I think all of us in the community of solid waste management should really start looking more into the food waste element, because of its contributions to greenhouse gas emissions, because the social impacts in terms of, you actually recover food, and, you can extend the lifespan of a final disposal site. So that is an area that, in these last minutes, I would really like, the community and the listeners to also pay attention to, because it's going to be a growing area, I think, with a lot of potential for doing something.
Right. So we have one more comment from James. I think we should. I think maybe you can take less than a minute to respond to that. And the crux of the comment is: have you looked at upstream options to reduce waste, or are you more focused on the downstream after waste generation or before? Have you, is that part of your strategy, the upstream part of it?
Yes. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. No, like I said, I mean, we're looking at both aspects, at upstream and downstream. I mean, and like I said, we're trying to do it tailored to specific conditions, but we see opportunities, tremendous opportunities for doing both at upstream and downstream. Obviously, right now, we're really trying to empower the people at the local level to be able to do things, but that doesn't mean that we're not looking also at the whole spectrum of integrated approaches to solid waste management.
Right. So you are enabling local communities to take the decision, local decision makers and local communities to take the decisions and support, whatever the decisions that they take. I think that kind of sums up, what you're doing very well. So thank you very much, Renan, for joining us. Greatly appreciate your time, and congrats on all the work that you're doing. All the best. And friends, so you've heard Renan Poveda from World Bank. And tomorrow we have our first interview as part of the Be Waste Wise Collective initiative. It's a partnership with organizations to make their knowledge easily accessible to a global audience. Our first partnership is with ISWA, and the first interview is with Antonis Mavropoulos. He'll be talking about China ban and the ways forward for countries worldwide. And after that, we have Adam Reed joining us from UK. He's a very respected professional in the industry, and he'll talk about the China ban too, to some extent, but he'll also talk about trends and updates in Europe and UK, and he'll also talk about his passion, the kind of change that he's creating. And with that, my name is Ranjit Anipu. I'm a co-founder of Be Wastewise. Thank you very much. Have a good day, good night, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjit.